age of head-spinning internet discourse, Ione Gamble is a writer who helps pick apart online phenomena, from wellness culture to digital narcissism to the latest beauty standards. She's the founder and editor-in-chief of the feminist culture zine Polyester and the host of its podcast. She's also the author of the essay collection Poor Little Sick Girls, which has just come out in paperback. The book was born from her experience being diagnosed with Crohn's disease when she was 19, leading her to reflect on issues like self-care, empowerment, and productivity. To dive into some of those topics, Ione Gamble joins us by video from London. Thank you so much for getting up early to speak with us today. I have to say I had a lot of fun listening to the Polyester podcast, but I do want to start with your book. It seems like being diagnosed with a chronic illness just as you were entering adulthood really shaped your way of seeing the world. Can you talk a bit more about what that time in your life was like?
Yeah, sure. So I had just moved to university. I had been kind of experiencing symptoms for a few months, went to the doctor, but I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease at a time when there was the beginning of this re-emergence of feminism that obviously we're all quite familiar with now. So I was spending a lot of time on social media anyway. Like at the time it was Tumblr, Instagram didn't even really exist yet. And I was seeing all of these like women my age making work about feminism, about empowerment. And I think the combination of that and being diagnosed with a chronic illness kind of really opened my eyes to a lot of inequality and how like the scales are not tipped in our favor, and kind of really made me passionate about the work I'm doing now.
Yeah, and you've talked about how things like wellness, culture, empowerment, that's something that's supposed to empower you, and things like self-love, but that some of those concepts can actually be quite oppressive.
Yeah, I think we exist in a culture now where a lot of feminist ideas have been highly commodified, which is what I talk about in the book. So things that kind of started with not just good intentions, but radical roots like self-care kind of began with the Black Panthers and began with disability activists. And now we just see it as an excuse to buy a bath bomb, which is just like another excuse to buy more stuff and kind of stick a plaster over all of our problems. So the book really kind of delves into how we've been given a poor hand when it comes to feminism and equality. As opposed to seeking true equality or empowerment, we're kind of just told to buy our way out of it.
And earlier this year, you published an essay in The Guardian about how getting diagnosed with Crohn's also changed your relationship with femininity. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure, yeah. So I feel like growing up, femininity was always something that was kind of looked down upon. I mean, it still is something that's fiercely looked down upon. You know, if you're like highly feminine, you're perceived to be less intellectual, less clever, be able to kind of move through the world in a less intellectual way. And so that pushed me away from femininity a lot. Like, even though I felt aesthetically drawn to pink and like all of these girly things, makeup, getting your hair done, getting your nails done, I just thought I was, not like the other girls and kind of beyond it. And then when I was diagnosed with a chronic illness, obviously my body was so out of my control. Like I couldn't control what was going on with my symptoms. I couldn't even control how I looked because being diagnosed and being unwell changed my body so much. So then I kind of made my way back to femininity and found the power in it and the power in identity to really like cement who we are as people. Yeah, I think that's about it, really.
And you also founded a zine, Polyester. That was about 10 years ago. What was your vision behind it at the time, and has it changed in the past decade?
So my vision for Polyester has always remained quite similar. So in the same way that we look down on femininity, the work that I was seeing on social media at the time was highly feminine, highly kind of pink, highly garish, kind of in your face, but was not considered political or feminist because of its aesthetic, whereas anyone who was kind of enjoying that work could see the political and the socio-political connotations. So I kind of just wanted to provide those artists, those people that were writing about these topics, a platform, because I grew up loving magazines. It was when feminism was, kind of on the rise. So I think it's changed over the 10 years in the fact that now we have had a moment of which feminism is extremely popular. Kind of everyone is familiar with feminist concepts, but it's been warped a little bit. It's been warped by capitalism. It's been warped by people that don't actually want true change. They just want to appear as if they are progressive. So Polyester has become more about fighting that while still retaining like its original vision, I would say.
There's also a lot of anti-trans rhetoric in some circles that identify as feminist. Your zine, though, is a very, very inclusive space. Can you talk about why that's important to you?
I think it's important because we have so much more in common than we have difference. Like from the moment of starting polyester, there was never a question as to whether trans women were, valid in their femininity or in their womanhood. Polyester is not just for like women, it's for like all marginalized people in that way. So whether you're a trans woman or whether you're a person of color, whether you're disabled, it's really about looking at the intersections. And I think our differences, we can come together, and that's what makes us stronger to fight oppression. I think the rhetoric that we're seeing around trans people is just scapegoating and is really going to hold us all back in the end. It's not going to help liberation, it's not going to help empowerment. If one of us is oppressed, then we all are, and we should all be coming together to fight.
And what's the audience like for polyester? Do you have a sense of if it's mostly people in the UK, or is it sort of attracting readers from all over the world?
Our audience is actually really split. So we have around a 30% UK readership and a 30% US readership, and then the rest of our audience is kind of dotted around Europe, and also Australia and Japan have quite strongholds of audiences there. I think it is because polyester was born on the internet, so it always had this very like international mindset. It wasn't just looking at the London scene or the British scene. It was really looking at like how a certain demographic of people were feeling at one time, and so yeah, our audience is quite spread out.
And it can be very exhausting to be online. It's also fascinating. Can you maybe talk about your personal relationship with social media, and if you have any guidelines for how to interact with it?
I think my personal relationship to social media, there's a very clear distinction between like if I'm posting on my personal account just for fun, like pictures of my friends, and then the way I interact with social media from the position of my job as like an editor-in-chief of Polyester, as a feminist and as a writer. Obviously, the internet and social media in particular can often seem like a hellscape, that we're all shouting at each other, that no one is actually being heard. So I try and kind of cut through that and look at what's actually interesting about what's going on in culture, whether it's like a TikTok feminist micro trend, or whether it is the way we talk together, like what to each other. Why are we so angry at each other on the internet all the time? I would say like my guidelines for social media are trying to detach yourself a bit from it. I think we're all too obsessed with authenticity, and it's impossible to achieve through a third-party platform that is the internet. No matter what you're putting out, it'll be a projection of yourself. And I also think not to be like #BeKind, but we should all not assume that people are coming from the worst place when they are posting or making a point. I feel like the internet is very confrontational, which means it's impossible to have, progressive conversation because we're constantly fighting with each other rather than just trying to talk to each other.
I definitely very much appreciate your positive voice. Your podcast is definitely one that cuts through that hellscape of social media. Ione Gamble, thank you so much for speaking with us. I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. A reminder, that's Ione Gamble, founder and editor-in-chief of the feminist culture zine Polyester. She's also the author of the essay collection Poor Little Sick Girls, which has just come out in paperback.